The woman in 6B asked me where the recycling room was, and I told her it was on the basement level, past the storage cages, second door on the left. She thanked me, and then she said, "What's on the third floor between you and the corner unit?" I live in 3A. The corner unit is 3C. Between us is 3B, which is the Makotas, a couple in their 60s who moved in before I did. "That's the Makotas," I said. "No, I mean the other one. The door between yours and theirs." I told her there was no door between mine and the Makotas. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said something obviously wrong, but you don't know them well enough to push it. She'd moved into the building 3 weeks earlier. I'd lived here for 4 years. "I went up to the third floor yesterday looking for the laundry," she said. "There's a door between 3A and 3B. It doesn't have a letter. It has a number, 9. I told her she was mistaken. She shrugged, and that was the end of it, and I went back upstairs to my apartment, and I walked past the Mukota's door, and I looked at the wall between their door and mine, and there was nothing there. Hallway, wallpaper, a scuff mark near the baseboard from when the Mukotas moved a bookshelf in. I stood there and looked at the wall for what must have been a full minute, and I could not tell you why. That night I pulled up the building's floor plan. Every tenant gets a copy in their welcome packet. I still had mine in a kitchen drawer. The third floor shows 4 units, 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D. The plan matched my memory. There was no unit between 3A and 3B. There was no apartment 9. But I kept thinking about the way the woman in 6B had said it. Not guessing, not confused. Describing something she had seen. With the quiet certainty of a person who has no reason to invent a door. The next morning I went to the management office on the first floor. The building is managed by a company called Terrace Property Group, and the on-site manager is a man named Phil Keeler, who has held the position for 11 years. I asked Phil about apartment 9. He looked at me blankly. Not the blankness of someone who doesn't know. The blankness of someone whose face has organized itself around the absence of a response before the response has been considered. Like a door closing before you've knocked. "There's no apartment 9, he said. "The new tenant in 6B says there's a door on the third floor marked 9. There's no apartment 9. Now, the building has 24 units. They're numbered by floor. Always have been. I let it go. I almost let it go permanently. I had a normal life at that point. I worked as a copy editor for an educational publishing company. I was not in crisis. I was not grieving. I was not searching for anything. I was a woman in her 30s, living alone in a mid-rise apartment building in Dayton, Ohio. And I had no reason to pursue this, except that the blankness on Phil's face had not looked like ignorance. It had looked like practice. I went up to the third floor that evening with my phone. I walked the hallway slowly. My door, 3A, was at the east end. Then 18 feet of hallway. Then the Mukota's door, 3B. I measured the 18 feet. I went downstairs and measured the hallway on the second floor between 2A and 2B. It was 11 feet, whereas the third floor hallway between my door and the Mukota's door was 7 feet longer than the equivalent hallway on the second floor. I want to be careful about this because I know how it sounds. Buildings have irregularities. Load-bearing walls shift layouts between floors. Mechanical chases, duct runs, structural columns. There are reasons a hallway on one floor might be longer than the corresponding hallway on another. I am not an architect. I do not claim this measurement proved anything. But 7 feet is not a duck to chase. 7 feet is a room. I knocked on the Makota's door that evening and asked Raymond Makota, as casually as I could, whether he'd ever noticed anything between his unit and mine. A utility closet, a maintenance door, anything. He said no. I asked if he'd ever heard of an apartment 9, and he said the building didn't have an apartment 9. He said it the same way Phil had said it. Not with the effort of recollection, but with the smoothness of a fact that had never required recollection because it had never been doubted. I thanked him and went home. I sat at my kitchen table, and I did something I cannot fully explain, which is that I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. I don't know why. I had no financial reason to check. But something about the phrase, "the rent is being paid," had surfaced in my mind. Not as words anyone had said to me, but as knowledge, the way you know your own middle name. It was just there. I have 2 accounts, a checking account and a savings account, both at US Bank. I opened the checking account's transaction history and scrolled through the last 3 months. Your rent to Terrace Property Group, $1,140 on the 1st of each month. Normal, my unit, 3A. Autopay, set up when I moved in. Then I opened the savings account. There was a second automatic payment, $775 per month, to Terrace Property Group on the 1st of each month. It had been active for 3 years and 7 months. I was paying rent on 2 apartments. I stared at the screen. I scrolled back. The payment began in October of my first year in the building, 6 months after I moved in. $775 every month, drawn from savings, paid to Terrace Property Group. The memo line on each transaction was auto-generated by the bank's bill pay system. It said, Unit 9. I had no memory of setting this up. I need you to understand that when I say I had no memory, I don't mean I had forgotten. Forgetting implies that a memory was formed and then lost, and this was different. There was no space where a memory should have been. I looked at the payment and I felt nothing, no recognition, no confusion, no déjà vu. It was like reading a transaction from someone else's account that had been inserted into mine. But it was my account, my login, my password, my savings, which I now realized had been declining at a rate I'd never noticed because I rarely checked the balance, and the amount was small enough to disappear inside my general sense of having less money than I expected. $775 a month for 43 months. $33,325. I had paid $33,000 in rent on an apartment I did not know existed, and I had not noticed. That was the first night. I'm telling you about the first night because everything that came after will be easier to follow if you understand that I did not approach this gradually. I did not have weeks of vague unease followed by a slow investigation. I went from a neighbor's question to a bank statement in less than 36 hours, and the bank statement was not ambiguous. It was my money, my authorization, my payment, and it was going somewhere I couldn't remember. I called US Bank the next morning and asked about the payment. The representative confirmed it had been set up online from my account using my credentials on October 4th of my first year. She could see the IP address of the device that initiated it. It was my home IP, my apartment. Someone sitting in my apartment logged into my account. Just had set up a monthly payment for a unit that no one in the building acknowledged. And the only person who lived in my apartment was me. I asked her to cancel the payment. She did. She confirmed the cancellation, and I hung up. And I felt a relief, that lasted approximately 4 hours until I checked the account again that evening and found that the payment had been reinstated. Same amount, same payee, same memo line. Set up at 2:47 a.m. from my home IP address. I had been asleep at 2:47 a.m. I live alone. My apartment has a deadbolt and a chain, and both were engaged when I woke up that morning. No one had entered my apartment. I canceled the payment again. I changed my bank password. I enabled two-factor authentication. I went to bed. At 3:12 a.m., the payment was reinstated. New password, a two-factor code sent to my phone and entered correctly by me at 3:12 a.m. while I was, as far as I knew, asleep. I set my phone to record video that night. I propped it on my nightstand, pointed at myself, hit record, and went to sleep. In the morning, I watched the video. At 2:50 a.m., I sat up in bed. My eyes were open. I reached for my phone, the same phone recording me, and I unlocked it and I navigated to my bank's app. And I watched myself re-enter the two-factor code that had been sent to the phone I was holding. And I watched myself set up the payment again. And then I put the phone back on the nightstand and lay down and closed my eyes. The whole thing took 6 minutes. I watched my own face during those 6 minutes. I looked calm. Not blank, not sleepwalking vacant. Calm. Like someone doing a familiar task. Like someone paying a bill they've paid many times before. I need to stop here and tell you what I did not do because I think it matters. I did not go to a doctor. I did not call a friend. I did not research sleepwalking or dissociative states or parasomnia. I know those would have been the rational responses. A version of me, the copy editor, the normal woman in 3A, would have made an appointment, described the symptoms, and submitted to evaluation. That is what a person does when they discover they are performing complex tasks in their sleep. But I didn't do that, and the reason I didn't do that is because the video did not look like sleepwalking. I have seen sleepwalking. My college roommate walked in her sleep, and she moved like someone underwater. Slow, imprecise, slightly wrong. The person on the video moved like me, or sat up like me. Reached for the phone the way I reach for the phone. Navigated the app with the efficiency of someone who knows where every button is. This was not a body moving without a mind. This was a mind I couldn't access operating my body with full competence. And there was one more thing. On the video, after I reinstated the payment and before I lay back down, I turned my head and looked directly into the camera, into my own recording. And my expression, I have watched this moment perhaps 40 times. My expression was patient, not angry, not distressed. Patient. The way you look at someone who keeps interrupting a task you're trying to finish. She knew I was watching. The other me. She knew I'd set up the camera and she looked into it and her face said, "I know. Stop interfering." I did not cancel the payment again. Instead, the next morning I went to the 3rd floor. I walked the hallway between my door and the Mukota's door. The wallpaper was continuous. The baseboard was unbroken. There was no door. But I put my hand against the wall at approximately the midpoint, where the extra 7 feet would place the center of whatever space existed behind it. And the wall was warm. Not hot, not alarming. Just warmer than the walls on either side of it by a degree or two. Like something on the other side was heated. Like something on the other side was lived in. I went to the management office. Phil was at his desk. I asked him directly, whether the building had ever had an apartment 9. "There is no apartment 9," he said, and this time I watched his face very carefully. The blankness was there, but underneath it, at the level of micro-expression, I saw something I recognized because I had seen it on my own face in the video. Not confusion, patience. The patience of someone who has answered this question before and will answer it again and understands that the question is part of the process. "Phil," I said, "I'm paying rent on it." He looked at me for a long time, then he opened a drawer in his desk and took out a ring of keys and held them up. Building master keys, the kind that open every unit. He flipped through them and stopped at one. It was brass, older than the others. The kind of key that gets cut at a hardware store, not stamped by a lock manufacturer. And he held it up and looked at it the way I had looked at my bank statement, with the blank, unresisting incomprehension of a person confronting evidence of their own unknown behavior. "I don't know what this opens," he said. "I've had it on this ring since I started. I've never used it. I've never thought about it." He put it on the desk between us. "I'm not going to think about it after you leave," he said. "I know that. I can feel it already. You're going to walk out and I'm going to put this key back on the ring and I won't remember this conversation. That's happened before. I don't know how many times." He was telling me this with the strained, effortful clarity of someone pushing a thought through a medium that is actively resisting it, like speaking underwater, like his own mind was the thing he was fighting. "Take the key," he said. "I don't know what it opens, but take it before I stop being able to tell you to take it." I took it. I went up to the 3rd floor. I stood in the hallway between my door and the Mukota's door. I held the key in my hand. There was no door. I put my hand on the warm section of wall and I pressed, gently, the way you test whether a surface is solid or hollow, and the wall gave. Not like drywall breaking. Like a door that had been painted over and the paint was old and brittle, and underneath the paint, the door was still there, still on its hinges, still functional. It moved inward about half an inch. I pushed harder. The paint cracked along the edges in a vertical line, revealing the frame. The door frame recessed slightly, with a knob that had been painted the same color as the wall. I cleared the paint from the knob with my fingernail. Underneath it was brass. There was a keyhole. I used the key. The door opened into a room approximately 8 by 10 feet. A single window, curtains drawn, letting in a thin seam of afternoon light. The room was furnished. A narrow bed made with a quilt I recognized as the same pattern my grandmother used to keep on her guest bed. A double wedding ring in blue and cream. A small wooden table with one chair. A lamp. A shelf with books. A braided rug on the floor. A closet with the door open, containing 3 or 4 items of clothing on hangers. The room was clean. Not abandoned clean. Not sealed and preserved clean. Maintained clean. Someone had been in this room recently. The lamp was plugged in. I turned it on and it worked. The books on the shelf were not antiques. 2 were recent paperbacks. Kirkus, a novel I recognized from a display at the Barnes & Noble on Far Hills Avenue, and a collection of essays I had been meaning to buy. I stood in the center of the room and I breathed, and I tried to understand what I was looking at. The bed was made the way I make beds. Hospital corners on the bottom, quilt pulled up and folded back 18 inches from the headboard, pillow centered. I learned this from my grandmother and I have never changed it. No one taught it to me as an adult. It's muscle memory from childhood visits. The clothing in the closet was my size, Not my clothes. I didn't recognize any of the items. But they were my size, my general color preferences, the kind of things I would buy if I were buying clothes for a version of myself who lived in a single room. Practical, soft, unhurried. On the table there was a notebook, a composition notebook, the kind with a marbled black and white cover. It was open to a page near the middle. The handwriting was mine. I sat down and read it. It was a journal. Entries dated and brief, written in a voice I recognized as my own, but more direct than the voice I use in my waking life. Less edited. The entries were not narrative, they were observations. October 7th. The walls are holding. Temperature differential consistent. She won't check for another month at least. The payment cleared November 2nd. Phil almost remembered today. Redirected him. Easier each time. The building accepts it now. The residents accept it. The room is settling into the gap between what is perceived and what is recorded. This is where it needs to be. December 14th. Brought the quilt from storage. The room felt thin without something familiar. It's not about comfort. It's about weight. The room needs to believe it's occupied or it won't stay. January 30th. She canceled the payment, reinstated it at 3 a.m. She'll try again. She doesn't understand yet that the payment is not for the room. The payment is what keeps the room here. Money is the only language the building speaks. If the building stops receiving rent for this space, the space will close, and what I'm keeping in it will have nowhere to go. February 3rd. She set up a camera. I looked into it. I wanted her to see my face and know that I am not a malfunction. I am not a disease. I am the part of her that knows what this room is for, and I've been keeping it maintained because she cannot do it consciously. If she could, she wouldn't need me. I read the entire notebook. It took an hour. The entries spanned 3 years and 7 months. They were meticulous. They documented the creation and maintenance of the room, how the other me had found the sealed door, opened it, furnished it, paid for it, and maintained the building's collective non-awareness of it through what the notebook called redirections. The entries describe these redirections as a kind of pressure, a sustained, attentional force that the other me could exert during the nighttime hours when the conscious me was asleep. Not mind control. Not supernatural influence. Something more like emphasis. The way you can make someone not notice something by confidently not noticing it yourself, scaled up and applied continuously night after night until the not noticing became structural. But the notebook did not explain what the room was for. The entries referred to it obliquely. The room needs to believe it's occupied. What I'm keeping in it will have nowhere to go. She cannot do it consciously. But the it was never named. The what was never described. There was a careful, deliberate withholding throughout the notebook. Not evasion, but protection. The other me was keeping something from me. Keeping it the way you keep a fragile thing in a room no one enters, by making sure no one knows it's there. I sat in the chair and I looked at the room and I tried to feel what was in it. I need to describe this carefully because it is the part that sounds the least credible, and it is the part I am most certain about. The room was not empty. I don't mean there was a presence, a ghost, a cold spot, a shadow in the corner. I mean, the room had a fullness to it that was different from the fullness of a furnished space. It felt the way a room feels when someone has just left it. the air still shaped by a body, the silence still holding the outline of a voice. But no one had just left. The feeling was permanent. The room was built around the shape of an absence, and the absence was specific. I knew whose absence it was. I knew before I let myself think it. My grandmother died when I was 23. She had lived alone in a house in Kettering for 31 years after my grandfather passed. And in the last 4 years of her life, she had dementia. And the woman who died was not the woman I knew. And I never grieved her properly because the person I loved had already been gone for years by the time her body followed. I told people I'd grieved. Yes, I told myself I had grieved. I hadn't grieved. I had noted her death the way you note the decommissioning of a building that had already been emptied, administratively, without the weight of what was lost, because the loss had been so gradual that by the end there was nothing sudden enough to break against. But the room had her quilt, and the room was made the way she taught me to make a bed, and the room felt the way her guest room felt when I was a child, and I would lie in it during visits and feel held by the particular quality of a house that belongs to someone who is paying complete attention to your comfort without making a performance of it. The room was not haunted. I want to be clear about that. My grandmother was not there. What was there was the space I had never made for losing her, the grief I had never metabolized. I see the other me, the competent, deliberate, nighttime me, had built a room for it, had found a sealed door in the building, opened it, furnished it with the closest available approximations of the things that made my grandmother's house feel like safety, and had maintained it for 3.5 years because the grief needed somewhere to exist, and I had never in my conscious life given it anywhere. I was not being haunted, I was being housed. A part of me that I couldn't reach during waking hours had looked at the unmourned loss I was carrying and had decided, with the practical clarity that apparently characterizes my unconscious mind, that if I would not build a space for it internally, she would build one externally, a physical room, rented, maintained, heated, furnished, a place where the grief could be, so that it did not have to be inside me, where it had no room and no acknowledgement, and was slowly compressing into something that would eventually do damage. The notebook's last entry was from 2 days before the woman in 6B asked me about the recycling room. She's going to find this soon. The new tenant on 6 sees the door. I can't redirect someone who hasn't lived here long enough to learn what not to see. This is fine. She's ready. She wasn't ready 3 years ago. She is now. When she finds this room, she's going to want to close it. She's going to want to cancel the payment and seal the door and be one person again. I understand that. It's a reasonable response. But I need her to sit in the room first. Just sit in it before she decides. If she sits in it, she'll feel what it's holding. And if she feels it, she'll know why I built it. If she knows why I built it, she might be able to do what I can't, which is grieve her while she's awake. That's all I've ever wanted. For her to grieve Nana while she's awake. I've been holding it for her. I am tired. I would like to put it down. But I can't put it down if there's nowhere for it to land, and she hasn't built anywhere yet. So I built this. Please sit in the room. I sat in the room. I sat in the chair at the small table in the 8x10 room between my apartment and the Makotas, in the yellow light of the lamp, with the quilt on the bed and the books on the shelf, and the handwriting I recognized as mine but more honest. And I felt my grandmother's absence the way I had not allowed myself to feel it in 10 years. It was not dramatic. I didn't sob. I didn't collapse. I sat in the chair and I felt the specific weight of a woman who had made me oatmeal with brown sugar on winter mornings. Who had taught me to fold hospital corners because she said a well-made bed was a promise to yourself that you were coming back. Who had looked at me in her last lucid month with an expression I couldn't read then and can read now. The expression of someone who knows they're leaving and wants to be sure the people they love will be all right and is not sure and is trying to hide that uncertainty and cannot. I sat there for 2 hours. When I left, I closed the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't seal it. I went back the next day. And the day after that, I didn't go at night. I didn't need to. The door was there for me now. I could see it. The wallpaper parted around it like something that had been holding its breath and was finally allowed to exhale. I don't know if the other residents could see it. I didn't ask when it wasn't their door. And over the next 3 weeks, I visited the room 11 times. I didn't do anything in it. I didn't perform rituals or speak to the air or try to summon anything. I sat in the chair and I let the feeling be there. The compressed, unmetabolized, 10-year-old grief for a woman I loved who had disappeared incrementally and then died, and whom I had never properly released. Because the release mechanism of the sharp, clean break of sudden loss had never arrived, and so the loss just stayed, formless, pressurized, taking up space I didn't know it occupied. Each visit the room felt slightly different, not emptier, lighter. The fullness I'd felt the first time, the shaped absence, the air still holding someone, was thinning, not disappearing, dispersing, like something that had been concentrated in a small space was being allowed to spread out, wind to move through me instead of sitting sealed in a room. I paid $775 a month to keep closed. I checked the notebook each time I visited. New entries appeared. She came back. Good. The room is lighter. She's taking it with her. That's how it's supposed to work. The room holds it until she can, and she carries it out in pieces small enough to bear. I slept through last night. The whole night. I didn't have to get up. She's doing it herself now. 4 more visits, maybe 5. Then the room can close. I'm gonna miss being needed. That last line is the one I think about most. Not the grief, not the room, not the partition self, or the sealed door, or the 3 years of rent. That line, I'm gonna miss being needed, written by a version of me that I cannot access during daylight hours, a new who built a room in the walls of my building and maintained it with the meticulous care of someone tending a garden, and who understood, better than I did, more honestly than I could, that what I needed was not therapy or revelation or intervention, but a place, a physical, heated, rented place where the thing I couldn't hold could wait until I was ready. I've been to the room 31 times now. The quilt is still on the bed. The lamp still works. The books on the shelf are different. She changes them. Leaves me things she thinks I'll like. She's usually right. There's a thermos of tea sometimes, still warm, which means she was there just before I arrived, or that she knows when I'm coming, or both. The payment still goes out on the 1st of every month. I've stopped trying to cancel it, not because I can't, because I understand now what it's for. It's not rent. It's maintenance. It's the cost of keeping a space open between who I am during the day and who I am at night, between the self that edits and the self that builds, between the woman who told everyone she'd already grieved and the woman who knew she hadn't, and quietly, patiently, over 3.5 years, built her a room to do it in. Phil doesn't remember our conversation. The Makotas don't see the door. The woman in 6B mentioned it once more, then stopped mentioning it. And when I brought it up last week, she looked at me with the same practiced blankness everyone else wears and said she didn't know what I was talking about. The redirection is still working. The building doesn't remember apartment 9. The building was never supposed to remember apartment 9. It exists in the gap between perception and record, maintained by a version of me who operates in the gap between waking and sleeping. And it will exist for exactly as long as it needs to, and not 1 month longer. The notebook's most recent entry is from last Tuesday. Almost done. She's carrying most of it now. The room is nearly at ambient. Another few weeks and it'll just be a room. Walls, a bed, a window. No weight, no shaped absence. Just a space that was used for something and then was finished. When it's done, I'll stop paying. The building will close around the door. Phil will take the key off his ring without noticing. The wallpaper will go smooth again, and she'll be one person carrying what she can carry in the usual way. I just need her to know one thing before I go. I don't know if she'll read this or remember it or whether it'll settle into the same gap everything else falls into, but I want to say it. I was never a sickness. I was never a breakdown. I was the part of you that loved Nana enough to build her a room when you couldn't, and I am glad I got to do it. When the room closes, I won't be gone. I'll just be you again. The whole of you. The you that sleeps, and the you that wakes, and the you that grieves, and the you that can't. All one woman. The way it was supposed to be before the loss got too heavy and I had to step in and hold it separately. Leave the key on the table when you're done. I'll know. The key is in my pocket. I'm not done yet. A few more weeks, she said, a few more visits. The quilt is still on the bed. The lamp is still on. The room is almost at ambient. I'll know when it's time because the room will feel like a room and not like the place where I kept the heaviest thing I own. And I'll leave the key on the table and close the door and walk back to 3A, which is 7 feet closer to the Makota's door than it used to be. And I will be one person again, carrying everything, missing the one who carried it for me. The rent is still being paid. It will stop when I'm ready. I'm almost ready.